My name is Tran. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a software validation engineer at scientist.com. I made some last minute changes to my talk to make it a little more applicable to any product team, so the title looks a little different from what you saw on the schedule. Today, my talk is going to be about how can you prevent scope creep, employing empathetic words to mitigate scope creep on tickets with feedback. Thanks to my teammate, Leanne Bradford, for introducing a bit of this topic earlier during her talk today. First, we're going to talk about the problem itself. What's going on with tickets with feedback? Next, we're going to talk about the solution. What strategies can we employ with empathetic words to prevent scope creep? Part 1 of the solution lies in the acceptance criteria and testing instructions. Part 2 of the solution is listing other known issues related to the ticket. After that, we'll discuss how to ping the team on Slack to make the first move. And finally, communication, responding to the team's problems. So what do I mean about scope creep on tickets with feedback? Let's look at an example of what I mean by that. Let's say it's Monday morning and you come to sprint planning. You look at your Kanban board, see what's in the ready for development column, and you say to yourself, hey, mow the lawn. That sounds simple and easy enough. I've done something like this before in another project, so I think I could do this one too. So you assign yourself a ticket, write the code, get it in code review, deploy to staging, and after some back and forth with QA, it passes. It leaves the QA column on your Kanban board, and without a doubt, you can say to yourself, I mowed the lawn. This ticket passes QA, and this ticket is done. Then, all of a sudden, your team comes back to you saying, this ticket isn't done. The dishes are still dirty. The laundry hasn't been done yet, and the toilet is in the kitchen. Drop a thumbs up in the chat if you know exactly what I'm talking about. Sometimes the team comes back to you with feedback that you know is outside of the ticket scope. What's up with that? This is the problem. And this problem leads to other problems. It leads to miscommunication on a ticket scope, which could then lead to rework or a long back and forth about what the ticket mowing the lawn is really about. This leads to time lost and dev hours lost, which means money down in the budget. Funnily enough, a lot of these issues can actually be prevented when you just take a moment to empathize with your team and stakeholders, employ the right words to address their needs, and understand their experience. Next, we talk about the solution. How can we use empathetic words to prevent scope creep on tickets with feedback? Part 1 of the solution starts at the very beginning, even before development begins and QA starts. It's having clear acceptance criteria and testing instructions. How does including clear acceptance criteria help QAing within a ticket scope? Well, the acceptance criteria itself is what determines a ticket scope. These are generally written before development begins. Clear acceptance criteria help developers understand the end goal of their code. Not only that, it helps QA understand the end goal of testing. Adding issue templates in GitHub helps establish the standard of including acceptance criteria in all tickets. So let's look at a real-world example. Adventist number 228, no method error for CSV importer. As the name of the ticket may suggest, Adventist was having many issues with CSV imports. One of its many issues was receiving a no method error when an importer completed. We'll be coming back to this example a lot in this talk. And this is an example where a ticket's acceptance criteria and testing instructions may have led to a failure response from a stakeholder. So what do we notice about this ticket's acceptance criteria? I'll give you all a moment to look it over. If you notice, there are no acceptance criteria on this ticket. And as you learned in the last slide, a ticket's acceptance criteria are what determines the scope of the ticket. If there are no acceptance criteria, how can we truly determine if a ticket is complete or if it needs rework? Omitting the right words on a ticket is an invitation for scope creep to occur. Next, let's take a look at number 228, testing instructions. The very last step indicates that the record should successfully process. Without acceptance criteria, what do the words successfully processed really mean? We'll come back to 228's testing instructions in a couple of slides. So not only are clear acceptance criteria essential to a ticket scope, but clear testing instructions are just as important. Just like there are best practices for development, like don't deploy to production on a Friday, you should write tests for any code changes, and you should write a descriptive commit message. There are also best practices for writing testing instructions as well. First off, testing instructions can always be added or updated after development is completed. Sometimes you don't know how to test something until after it's already developed, so it is totally fine to add testing instructions at the very end. You can also include a screenshot of an example of a failure in the ticket. This can help frame the scope within your teammates' minds. But this one can be tough to find since we tend to be quick to delete bugged items off production, but if you're able to do it, it can definitely help a lot in the long run. You should also include updated sample files for testing. This ensures that we are validating the correct data and formats, making your testing instructions more useful. This was actually an issue at Advances number 228 as well, which was a missed opportunity for me to verify if we were using updated testing materials. Updated testing instructions should be at the top of the ticket. Some threads are 20 to 30 comments long, which can be full of dense and even conflicting discussion. Just like how updated acceptance criteria should be at the top of the ticket to help developers, updated testing instructions should also be at the top of the ticket to help whoever is doing QA. This helps keep your testing instructions concise. Every ticket should have testing instructions. Yes, even the ones that are not QA testable. If it lands in the QA column, then someone is going to look at it as if it were QA testable. Otherwise, you should just close your ticket or move it to the next column if it's not testable. It takes 1 minute to write not QA testable, but it'll save hours of wait time in between when somebody asks for clarification. One of the biggest best practices is simply empathizing with your testers and reading your tester instructions to a rubber duck. We'll explore what empathizing with your testers means in a bit. And lastly, make sure that the end result is cut and clear. We're going to revisit Advances number 228 to see what that really means. Empathize with your testers and read your instructions to a rubber duck. Well, what does that really mean? Well, we should put ourselves in our reader's shoes. We may know everything about this ticket and its life cycle, but can a stakeholder who doesn't attend every daily stand-up come in, read this ticket, and understand its purpose and limitations? As a reminder, Advances number 228 is called no method error for CSV importer. We can assume that this means that when we're testing, we should look to see if the CSV importer leads to any no method errors. In the original testing instructions, the last step says the record should successfully process. However, if y'all remember, this ticket didn't have any acceptance criteria, and that makes it kind of hard to understand what a successful process really means within the scope of this ticket. So let's read a stakeholder's notes after they QA'd this ticket. Test 2 did not populate the ARC identifier field, which we need. This was actually my mistake because I didn't take the time to verify if the test sample files were up to date. So I did not follow best practices for testing instructions here. Next, she says, both tests failed to map relation as part of to part of. And finally, she says, both tests failed to map format extent to extent. The problem here is that the CSV parser created generic works rather than image works. I need guidance on how to indicate to the CSV parser what work type to use. Please let me know. Because of these three things, our stakeholder considered this a QA fail, and this was kicked back for rework. Now, can y'all look at this and tell me where in this message does our stakeholder mention that the CSV importer failed due to a no method error? Well, she doesn't. Instead, she mentions two other failures unrelated to this ticket scope. So what happened here? Perhaps she didn't understand what successfully process really meant in the testing instructions, and with no acceptance criteria to guide her, she was thinking outside of the ticket scope. This is why it's important to take a moment to empathize with your testers and read your instructions to a rubber duck. If you can write instructions to make your rubber duck understand how to test this ticket and what's considered a pass or fail, then you are one step closer to creating empathetic testing instructions. make sure that the end result is cut and clear. So here's what we did to improve this ticket's testing instructions. We added a single sentence that says, there are no method errors that show up on imported works. Now, this isn't foolproof, and as we'll see later in my talk, there is still so much more we can do, but it's a start in the right direction for testing instruction best practices. Being empathetic and putting ourselves in our stakeholders' shoes, we added a mere 10 words to clarify the pass-fail criteria on this ticket. Now, how else can we use the right words to empathize with our readers' mindsets? Solution 2 is to list other known issues. So let's go back to Adventist number 228, no method error for CSV importer. Of the many cogs in the Adventist bulk racks machine, there were many other CSV importer tickets. There are issues with work types, relationships, and even 194 relation is part of, something that our stakeholder mentioned in her QA comment on number 228. Now that we see this list, we know for sure that her comment about relation is part of is out of scope for 228. If we list all of the other known related issues on the ticket, we could help our team think within the scope of the ticket. You can also say, if this ticket passes and no other issues, and other issues are found, please create a new ticket for that bug. By including just a bit more information, we could take the mental load off of our teammates so they can better understand what is within this ticket scope and what's not. So these last two strategies focus on effective communication. This strategy here focuses on what you can do to take initiative, making the first move by pinging the team on Slack. Pinging the team on Slack can be a quick way to communicate a ticket's intent and what to do if a ticket fails QA. It also pushes the team to test sooner so that tickets don't get stale in QA. It also helps us push a ticket to deploy to production in time. So let's use Adventist imported issues again for a hypothetical example. We can say, hey team, we have moved some tickets over into QA. These are the acceptance criteria for these tickets. We're currently working on imported issues. We know there's more work going on and there are more imported tickets. If this passes the strict criteria, but you're still seeing other issues, let us know and we'll make new tickets. We're aware of these other issues on these tickets. And finally, if you're finding new issues after running this test, please create new tickets for them. I also have a real world example from Poundly Palsy. I sent this to the Poundly Palsy client channel Wednesday evening so they could see it Thursday morning in hopes that they can do some client QA in time for the production deploy on the same day. I outline all 3 tickets that are waiting for their QA, how to test them, what to expect, and what's considered a pass or fail. I then let them know that they could ping me for any questions at any time so we can get these tickets across the line as soon as possible. As you can see, making the first move by pinging the team on Slack and setting the expectations right then and there can reduce scope creep. Our final strategy is simply to respond to your team's problems. Another lesson in effective communication. So let's look back at our stakeholders QA notes for Adventist 228, no method error for CSV importer. She says, test 2 did not populate the ARC identifier field, which we need. Again, this was my mistake because I didn't verify if the test sample files were up to date. Next, she says, both tests failed to map relation as part of to part of. And finally, she says, both tests failed to map format extent to extent. So how we could have responded was, it looks like you didn't see any no method errors. Can we close this ticket and continue working at other tickets? In other words, but like, was the original problem solved though? Fortunately, my teammate Kirk has much better etiquette than I do, so this is how he responded. When our stakeholder said, I need guidance on how to indicate to the CSV parser what work type to use, Kirk said, to answer your generic work question, if the model isn't specified in the CSV, then generic work is the default work type. When our stakeholder said, test 2 did not populate the ARC identifier field, Kirk said, the reason why ARC identifier wasn't showing up was likely because you took it out of the CSV. I'm not sure if taking it out of the CSV was intended. I like to understand this part better. This was actually my mistake, so thanks for being kind about that, Kirk. And finally, when our stakeholder said, Both tests fail to map a relation is part of to part of, which again, relation is part of as addressed in ticket number 194, not this ticket number 228. Kirk said, the mapping for part of has been adjusted, so it shows up now. The right statement now renders as human readable fields instead of displaying the URI. He responded to each and every one of her problems. When you do that, you take a moment to empathize with your teammates' concerns, understand where they're coming from, and gently guide them to think within a ticket scope so they can QA it for what it's truly about. So it's all about communication and using the right words to be empathetic to mitigate scope creep. So thank you all for attending my very first conference talk. Apologies for the last minute changes that didn't make it to the program notes. I hope I was able to share some valuable tips to empathize with your readers to help reduce scope creep on tickets with feedback. Thank you to everyone who helped contribute real world examples for my talk. Here's my LinkedIn if you want to connect. Do we have any questions?